Signalgate. You remember that, don't you? Well, there's a Pentagon investigation out that faults Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. We will have bipartisan reaction from Capitol Hill. Small business job losses continue, and manufacturing in America, it's a bit stalled. So what's going on? Top White House economist and possibly the next Fed chairman, Kevin Hegseth, joins us. The chair of the House Democratic Caucus, Pete Aguilar, and immigration raids, the president's drug war off the coast of Venezuela, and the pardoning of Texas Democrat Henry Cuellar. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. We have too many newsmakers tonight for me to do anything other than get out of the way. We start with Eleanor Watson and a Pentagon Inspector General's report on what came to be known as Signalgate. Before we get to Eleanor, a brief refresher. In March, then-Trump National Security Advisor Mike Waltz started a text chain with top government officials on Signal. Details of ongoing military operations against Houthi targets in Yemen were exchanged. A journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic, was inadvertently put on that text chain. After carefully confirming the authenticity of those texts, Goldberg reported what played out across this non-secured app known as Signal. It had details about operations, targets, and military assets. A Pentagon investigation ensued. We now have the conclusions. Eleanor joins me here at the family table. What do we know? What are the conclusions?
Well, from our sources who have seen the report makes 2 points. One, that by sharing these details in a Signal chat about an operation ongoing, about to start in Yemen, the secretary risks endangering troops and the mission. The report, according to our sources, also makes the point that the secretary violated Department of Defense protocols by using a personal phone to conduct official business. The details in those messages posted by The Atlantic after the Defense Department and the administration denied the existence, those details included the launch times of the aircraft, the type of the aircraft before they launched, and the exact time when the first bombs will definitely drop. We know from our sources that those details were passed from Central Command to Secretary Hegseth with the appropriate classification markings before the secretary shared them into the chat. What the report doesn't get into, according to our sources, is how or if the secretary declassified those before he shared them. It only notes that he has that authority. The Pentagon has launched onto that to say that this report exonerates him from any allegations that he shared classified information, and the case is closed. But scrutiny will unlikely end because these details are, at the very least, very sensitive, and the report hasn't even been released to the public yet.
They're operational details. They are of a classification that may not be top secret, but they are of some secrecy. Mm-hmm. And the government wants to keep those things out of public view while they're going on. That's basic. Correct?
Correct.
And that didn't happen.
That didn't happen because of the inadvertent adding of the journalist. We now have these messages, but what the report is saying is that by sharing those details in a Signal message, not on a classified network where they're usually communicated, where they're required to be communicated, the secretary and his staff risked endangering troops with this mission, because if you have aircraft launching at a specific time and that gets into a foreign adversary's hands, then they have the opportunity to not only defend against the attack, but go on the attack themselves, risking those pilots' lives.
And a quick reminder to our audience that Signal is encrypted, but it is broachable. You can get into it, and foreign adversaries lurk around things like Signal, knowing that government officials and sometimes high positions might communicate something in there. And so it is a place of vulnerability, recognized by the Trump administration when it first came in, advising, if I remember correctly, Eleanor, top officials not to engage in anything that was even potentially secret on Signal.
I don't know about the administration as a whole putting out that guidance, but I know Pentagon policy in the lead up to this was that Signal should not be used for classified information. And I should note that the report, when it comes out tomorrow, is not just about these messages that were in the Atlantic that Jeffrey Goldberg was added, but it came out later that the secretary was using Signal for other group chats having to do maybe with this mission, but also potentially other. The report is supposed to look at his entire use of the commercial apps for sensitive information.
Eleanor Watson, thank you so very, very much. I appreciate it. I want to turn now literally to the Senate. Rhode Island Democratic Senator Jack Reed, who is the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator, I'm so glad to have you with us. What do you know?
Thank you very much.
About the report, the Inspector General's report, and what is your assessment of the conduct of the Defense Secretary?
Well, the report, which I've read, is still classified, but there are public statements already that have indicated that there were serious misjudgments by the Secretary. Poor decisions about taking sensitive information and putting it on an unclassified system. And I think the most compelling thing I've heard is a conclusion that he jeopardized the lives of pilots that were going into action by releasing critical data. All of this adds up to very, very poor judgment. As I said at his confirmation hearing, I did not believe he had the competence, the temperament, and the experience to be Secretary of Defense, and he's proven that.
The White House said the following through Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary. This review affirms what the administration has said from the beginning. No classified information was leaked. President Trump stands by Secretary Hegseth. Your reaction to that, Senator Reed?
Well, that might be a technicality. Certainly very highly sensitive information was released on a non-classified source. None of that information should have been discussed on that source. And the Inspector General concluded that the release of the information jeopardized the lives, potentially, of American airmen and other servicemen. So that's a very weak defense for what took place.
And Senator, when the White House says, as the Pentagon also says, well, nobody got hurt, nobody was really truly jeopardized or put in any jeopardies, so what are you worrying about?
Well, I would worry about that becoming a common practice in the Department of Defense. One of the ironies here is if someone else besides Secretary Hegseth did it, they would likely be charged under the UCMJ or other federal law for releasing classified information or at least utilizing a unclassified system to talk about sensitive information. So we're worried about the impact on the military. If this gets to be accepted, it'll be extraordinarily dangerous to the conduct of military operations.
Tomorrow, Senator, Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley will come before you and others on the Armed Services Committee in regard to what happened on September 2nd off the coast of Venezuela. 2 strikes, maybe more, and suggestions that that second strike might have been a war crime or something approximating one. What do you want to hear from Admiral Bradley? And have you reached, I know you choose your words carefully, Senator, any conclusions about whether or not what has been reported might constitute a war crime?
Well, first of all, we have to give Admiral Bradley an opportunity to explain the situation. And I would also commend Senator Wicker because he joined me in calling for a thorough investigation. We're going to essentially ask in detail what happened, who gave what orders, what were the orders? Were they to disrupt the traffic? Were they to simply sink the ships or other aspects of this? What has been suggested in the press, if that is true, that there were deliberate attacks upon individuals in the water, that would certainly constitute a war crime.
I want to read for you something, Senator, that Tom Nichols wrote in The Atlantic this week, because the Pentagon said Admiral Bradley had broad discretion and that Secretary Hegseth did not give him an explicit order for a second or maybe more strikes against those clinging to wreckage from the first strike. He writes as follows: "This seems implausible. Bradley is an experienced officer who, by virtue of his rank and position, would be intimately familiar with the laws of armed conflict. He would have to know that such an order is likely a war crime, and any senior officer would want civilian leadership to sign off. Do you believe that to be accurate?
I think that's an accurate assessment, yes. I also understand and recall that Secretary Hegseth was very prominently declaring that he had essentially been involved with the details of all these initial strikes, that it was his work, his involvement that was significant. And now he seems to be walking away and saying, well, no, this was I was too busy to watch the rest of the video. I walked away and Admiral Bradley did something. It's not a particularly compelling response when you contrast it with his boasting, really, of how intimately he was involved in the initial operations, the first several strikes.
Senator Reid, I want to play for you sound from President Trump just this afternoon about what he, in response to a question about potential land strikes in Venezuela, said. Please listen.
Very soon we're going to start doing it on land, too, because we know every route, we know every house, we know where they manufacture this crap, we know where they put it all together, and I think you're going to see it very soon on land.
What are the implications of that, and do you believe this is a full-bore intimidation campaign by the president to drive Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, into exile without actually launching kinetic strikes in the country?
Well, I think it's a very complicated, confused strategy. First of all, there is no rationale for keeping a aircraft carrier task force in the Caribbean. They could be used more effectively elsewhere. It's a head game he's playing with Maduro. Just a few days ago, it was reported he spoke to him. Now today, he's claiming he's going to have land attacks. I don't think there's a strategy behind this. I think a lot of it is just off the cuff, ad hoc. I want to get rid of him today, tomorrow, maybe I can make a deal. And this is characterizing a great deal of the national security strategy, and that's probably not the right term, but the national security programs of this administration. One day he's going to negotiate, the next day he's going to attack. I don't think there's any legal basis for the United States to conduct military operations against the government of Venezuela in Venezuela. There's a separate issue here about the drug dealers. That, too, is highly questionable. But an attack on a sovereign nation without any more serious justification would require, I think, the act of Congress.
Rhode Island Democratic Senator Jack Reed, ranking Democrat on the Armed Services Committee. Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Earlier, I spoke with Texas Republican Congressman Michael McCall about the Signal report and much more. Here's our conversation. Congressman, CBS News has confirmed through various sources that a Pentagon Inspector General's report found that during Signalgate, the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, risked compromising sensitive military information which could have endangered American troops and mission objectives. How do you respond to that?
Well, I do know the Inspector General's report found that none of the information was classified information, which is very important. It was all unclassified. But, I think we have a duty, both in Congress and the executive, to ensure our communications are not, put like guys like you on the text so it gets out publicly. That's just kind of common sense. And, anytime you send troops into harm's way or you have naval vessels, shooting tomahawks in the country, you want to keep that as close to the vest as possible. I think, overall, I think the perception is it was a bit reckless, and the consequences were there. We know that my actually good friend Michael Waltz paid the price, unfortunately, but now he's the ambassador to the United Nations.
So is it your understanding, Congressman, that it wasn't classified because in the moment the Defense Secretary declassified it, even though there's no documentation of that?
I don't know about that, Major, to be honest with you. I'd have to look closer at the Inspector General's report. I do think it was pretty clearly stated, though, that it was not classified, and I know that the Secretary of Defense, now War, has testified to that, as has the CIA director, Ratcliffe, and Michael Waltz as well.
So you would put this up as a kind of rookie mistake?
I think it was a little bit, it could have been done better, put it that way. Did it ultimately endanger lives? No. But in the future, I would have a better practice to go under to make sure these communications are secure so they don't leak to the public. You don't want to give the enemy advance warning of your intentions, especially a strike such as this one.
You just came from a hearing at a subcommittee with Lindsey Graham on the fate of Ukrainian children. I'd like to ask you, what do you believe or what do you fear is happening in the Trump administration's continued conversations with Vladimir Putin about the future of the war in Ukraine?
Well, what I've seen so far, and I was with the Ukraine ambassador yesterday, is that, Zelensky seems to be making all the concessions, willing to come to the table to negotiate. Mr. Putin is not making concessions. I don't know his willingness. I do commend the administration for seeking a peace agreement. I know that Ukraine would like to get there. The question is, will Putin be willing to do so? One of the topics at the hearing today that I testified about were the 20,000 Ukraine children abducted and indoctrinated against their own country by the Russians, by the Russian Federation. In addition, there are 43,000 children in these military camps in the occupied territories where an additional 1 million children are that are also vulnerable to this sort of indoctrination, which not only goes against Ukraine, but also against Europe, and also, in their words in Russia, against NATO. So you have to ask yourself the question, are they going to be content with the Donbass and the land bridge to Crimea, or do they want more? I think history would be a great judge here that, like most dictators, they want to go farther.
I want to talk to you about Venezuela and back again to the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. In a column today, George Will in the Washington Post wrote the following: Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth seems to be a war criminal without a war. An interesting achievement. The killing of survivors, I continue to quote George Will, by this moral slum of an administration should nauseate Americans. A nation incapable of shame is dangerous, not least to itself. How do you respond to that?
Well, I admire George Will. Here's the way I see it, right? On the policy level, I know as former chairman of Homeland Security and Foreign Affairs that when you secure the land border, as we have now, and we provided the deterrence, that the maritime border becomes very important and essential, because then they'll go to maritime. This is precisely the deterrence that needs to be done in maritime space. This is done in international waters. They have been designated a foreign terrorist organization, the cartels involved. And so from a War Powers Act standpoint, I do believe Article 2 self-defense provides the constitutional authorities. If there's an invasion in Venezuelan waters or land territory, that would be a different question that would, I think, invoke the War Powers Act. But at the end of the day, the policy of stopping ships with poison coming in to kill Americans is a good policy. I think it's been a little bit mismanaged in the messaging. And what do I mean by that? I mean, in terms of, instead of talking about the policy, we're going after, talking about hanging members in Congress and in the Senate, or, other rhetoric that could be toned down. I think the administration is very solid on the policy piece if they would just stick to that argument.
What about this reporting about September 2nd strike, 2nd, 3rd, or possibly 4th, in which survivors clinging to some wreckage were killed? Many regard that as not only a violation of Pentagon standards, but possibly the Geneva Convention itself.
Well, we're not a signatory to the law of the sea treaty. Having said that, though, Major, you're hitting on a very important point here. A lot of this could be managed better and could be avoided if Congress was better briefed and informed on the issue. To my knowledge, only the Armed Services Committee has been briefed on this issue. The Foreign Affairs Committee has not been briefed on this issue, both House and Senate. And many times when things like this happen, we have an auditorium-wide skiff briefing with all the members of Congress in a classified sense to hear from the administration. That would be my strong recommendation in this case.
Texas Congressman Mike McCall, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Major.
Still to come, a Texas Democrat facing bribery charges pardoned by President Trump. Plus, the president says he will announce Fed Chair Jerome Powell's replacement early next year. At the top of that list, Director of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hegseth. Guess what? He joins me later this hour. And California Congressman Democrat Pete Aguilar represents one of the country's most immigrant-rich regions. What he has to say about the president's intensifying crackdown on all forms of immigration. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. President Trump today pardoned Texas Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar and his wife. They were indicted last year on more than a dozen federal charges, among them an allegation they received $600,000 in bribes. Cuellar denied wrongdoing and won re-election in 2024. Weijia Jiang joins us from the White House. Weijia, I want to play sound from the president about this from this afternoon. The context he said that was behind the pardon. Let's quickly listen.
He's a respected person. He was treated very badly because he said that people should not be allowed to pour into our country. And he was right. He didn't like open borders. He was on the border. You know, he represents a very respected man. He represents the people on the border. And he saw what was happening. And as soon as he made that statement, I then said, I'll bet he gets indicted. And that's what happened.
We did take it from there.
Well, Major, you just heard President Trump explain why he thought Cuellar and his wife were indicted, and he says it was much like what he personally experienced, which he characterizes as a witch hunt. Now, it is true that Congressman Cuellar was one of the most outspoken members of Congress when it came to the Biden administration's immigration policies. Obviously, he represents a district right along the southern border. He said that there were open borders, that there weren't enough resources being used to curb immigration, and that the asylum policies under the Biden administration were not adequate. But two things can be true, right? That can be true, and he could have been engaged in criminal activity, which is why he was indicted. Now, it's important to note he was not convicted. His trial is set for sometime next year. That will now not happen now that he has received this pardon. But when you ask President Trump, he would likely say, as we just heard, that he should never have been charged in the first place because he claims those charges were not justified, but only politically motivated. The reason this matters, Major, is because it's part of a pattern that we've seen really since the president took his second term in office. One of his first actions was to pardon more than 1,500 people who were convicted as part of the January 6th assault on the Capitol. Just this week, he pardoned a former Honduran president who was convicted, by the way, here in the U.S. For drug trafficking because he said that he, being the president, said that he was set up by the Biden administration. So the pattern is that it seems the president hands out pardons and clemencies to allies and supporters. Major.
Weijia Jiang, North Lawn of the White House. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it. Are President Trump's tariffs a drag right now on the U.S. economy? We will discuss that with someone who has a very precise perspective, the director of the National Economic Council. His name is Kevin Hegseth. He joins us next. Welcome back to the Takeout. Thanks for hanging out with us. Here is a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. House Democrats released never-before-seen video and images of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein's private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. They show bedrooms, also a room with a dentist chair and masks hanging from a wall. Also the words power and deception written on a chalkboard. Other pictures show a landline phone. Those of us old enough to remember what landline phones can explain that later. With a speed dial list. That's what they came with. And some of the names on that speed dial list redacted, interestingly. House Oversight Committee ranking member Robert Garcia said the images represent a, quote, disturbing look, unquote, into Epstein's world. The U.S. Virgin Islands, where two of Epstein's private islands were located, provided these files to the committee in response to a subpoena. Push by Democrats to flip a Republican congressional seat fell short in Tennessee. Republican Matt Van Epps won the 7th congressional district in a special election, the margin 9 points. President Trump carried that district by 22 points in 2024. The narrowness of the race forced Republicans to plow millions into the campaign, and that was enough to push Van Epps to victory over Democrat Afton Bain, a progressive member of the Tennessee House of Representatives. The labor market slowdown intensified in November. That, according to reports from ADP, which found that private companies cut 32,000 workers, with small businesses shedding, according to ADP's data, 120,000 jobs last month. There was, however, some good news. Larger businesses, that's companies with 50 or more employees, added 90,000 jobs. The ADP report is the last data set that will be presented to the Federal Reserve before its meeting later this month. The director of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hegseth, joins me now. Kevin, I'm grateful to have you on the show. We'll get to that data that I referred to in a second, Kevin, but I want to play to you and for my audience sound from the president yesterday talking about the potential new chair of the Federal Reserve. Please listen.
I guess a potential Fed chair is here, too. I don't know. Are we allowed to say that? Potential. He's a respected person, that I can tell you. Thank you, Kevin.
That was not any other Kevin. That was Kevin Hegseth, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
True? Is that what's going to happen?
Well, you know, I think that I show up every day and do my job at NUC. The president's going to decide by the end of the month, he says, and he's been looking at a number of candidates. I can tell you that it's a great group of people, and if I were Fed chair, I'd be leaning on them for advice a lot. It's be interesting to see how it goes. But I am really the happiest person ever when the president said I could come and be the director of the National Economic Council. It's a dream job, and coming here every day is a blast.
I know you for a long time, Kevin. You're candid when you are so inclined. Is that a job you'd like to have?
I'd like to do what the president needs me to do.
Very good, very good. I also want to play for you sound from the Treasury Secretary at yesterday's cabinet meeting, Scott Bessent, about what next year is going to look like. Please listen.
So we're going to have growth. We've had 2 4% quarters before the Schumer shutdown. We're going to go back to that. So not only are we going to have great growth, but it's going to be low inflationary growth.
So is that a White House prediction now for 2026? 4% GDP year long?
Right. Right. So we know that the answer is yes, that it is a prediction. The CEA hasn't put out their official prediction yet. But the bottom line is that we're going 4%, 2 quarters in a row ahead of the government shutdown. We think the government shutdown knocked a couple percent off of growth in the fourth quarter, so maybe it's going to be about 2%. But then there's going to be a rebound effect where a lot of the activity that was slowed because of the shutdown shows up in January and February. The other thing that's going to happen, Major, is that people who have no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, they haven't changed their withholding this year. But as soon as they start to file their taxes, they're going to get really, really big refunds. And so we expect a steady flow of big multi-$1,000 refunds for hardworking Americans. And, we'll be communicating a lot that people should actually file early. And I'm sure that there'll be a lot of, for-profit tax preparers that are running ads saying, hey, get your refund now, and we'll help you do that. But for sure, we think that there's going to be a huge amount of extra cash in people's pockets as we come into the new year. And then the other thing that we have at the same time, and this goes back to what Secretary Bessent emphasized and emphasizes all the time, is that there's a heck of a lot of capital spending that we've been marking down how many groundbreakings for new factories there are in the U.S. We're up to about 20 over the last 2 months. And so all of those things increase supply so you could have the growth that we're talking about without putting too much pressure on inflation.
Kevin, how do you contextualize the ADP data that I just talked about? Because not only 120,000 jobs lost on small businesses, but 4 out of the last 6 months net negative in small business employment. What does that tell us?
Right. Well, what we really need to see is the next BLS report. We're going to get 2 months of data in a couple of weeks, and then that'll help us have a better handle on what's going on in the labor market. I can say that when activity is really high, like as you know, we have the GDP now number of about 4% growth in the third quarter, and employment is not growing really, really fast, then that's because productivity is going up a lot. And productivity means that everybody's, making more stuff for the same hour that they worked. And productivity, there's a really simple story for why productivity is going up, which is that AI is becoming part of the way every business runs its stuff. And so we could be in a moment where productivity is booming, GDP is booming, and that it takes a while for firms to figure out how to use everybody they got because the people that they hired last year are so productive all of a sudden. And it could be that there's a pause, and that's what we're seeing in the data, but I won't believe it until I see a next couple of BLS reports. And I want to see both the household and the payroll surveys, too, because they have different information.
I want to ask you, Kevin, about something I read in a journal called Supply and Demand Chain Executive. 5 trends reshaping U.S. manufacturing in 2025. The first one, output levels off with no catalyst for growth. It writes, manufacturers increased output by just 0.8% year to date, while the Purchasing Managers Index, PMI, fell to 48 in July, marking 5 straight months of contraction. Looking to 2026, manufacturers anticipate a mild contraction in the first half, followed by flat performance. Persistent inflation, high inventories, and sluggish freight volumes continue to slow activity. Is that worrisome to you?
Mm-hmm. The manufacturing numbers that I've been looking at, the hard numbers, including the industrial production stuff that the Fed produces, those numbers have been very solid, which is why we could be looking at 4% GDP growth. And so, I'd really have to dig through the numbers that you talked about and compare it to the stuff that I'm seeing from the raw industrial production numbers. And also there's something called the M3 survey at the Bureau of Census. And those numbers, capital goods, orders and shipments, they look really, really solid for manufacturing. And so I think that manufacturing had a big negative shock during the Biden administration, and it's recovered a lot this year. But we have to, now that we've got the government open, we're going to get all the data, and we'll be able to talk more coherently about how the government data, which is more authoritative, usually meshes with the other things. The one other thing I can say that we studied a lot in the last couple of weeks is that sentiment surveys always collapse during government shutdowns. And so sometimes there's a relationship between a sentiment survey and then, so people have consumer sentiment, and then maybe if it's south, then they're not buying stuff, or business sentiment is high, then maybe they're investing. But all the sentiment indices become less useful to understand when there's a temporary government shutdown. And so we saw the normal sort of shutdown effect in the sentiment indices pretty much across the board.
Kevin, we love to nerd out on this show. I appreciate your willingness to nerd out with me on all the data. Kevin Hegseth, Director of the National Economic Council and quite possibly the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. You're always welcome here, Kevin. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Major.
The redistricting battle in Indiana, that's putting lawmakers in jeopardy, political and otherwise. How President Trump's push for new congressional lines led to threats against some Republicans. Scott McFarland is here with the latest reporting. Next, right on the take. He's right there, right here, right on the takeout. That's coming up next. Welcome back. Indiana, that is where the FBI is investigating a growing number of threats aimed at Republican lawmakers. At least a dozen state legislators there have been subjected to bomb threats and swatting incidents. Among those targeted, lawmakers who were publicly named and criticized by President Trump for opposing the redrawing of congressional lines there. CBS News Justice correspondent Scott McFarland following the story, and you talked to one of them, Scott.
Yeah, the one we spoke with was one actually who was supporting the redistricting. So this has metastasized itself to a broader set of threats, all of it targeting Republican state senators in Indiana amid this very heated, if not toxic, debate.
Wait a minute, he supports it and he still got
He got it too, which is an indication that there is either a arms race of sorts in the world of these threats, or, as is often the case, somebody was just mistaken about who they were targeting with a threat. The FBI and state police in Indiana both still trying to find the person or people responsible. They're still investigating. But if you listen to State Senator Ron Alting, he'll tell you how impactful this is on the legislators.
I don't appreciate that kind of anger, that kind of violence. You know, we're a democracy. I think, honestly, I think it came out of state. I don't think it's coming from local Hoosiers. I think it's out of state individuals doing it. Hoosiers take a little bit more pride and a little bit more, uh, down to earth, that we believe that if you don't believe in something someone is saying, you can go to the voter's box and vote them in, or you vote them out.
You talked to a former federal law enforcement officer who said there's something distinctively malicious here, Major. If you got both sides of this dispute menacing, harassing, endangering the lives of public officials, a decision's going to be made on this by the legislature. Right. And however this goes, it has the risk of validating people who issued threats, making them feel like they were justified in a disturbing way, and could trigger copycats, not just in Indiana, nationwide.
And a quick reminder to the audience, about 30 seconds, what's swatting?
Swatting is when you target someone with an attack by calling the police, pretending there's an emergency at that target's home, draw the SWAT unit there, and hope maliciously that there's some type of face-off, maybe even firing of a gun.
And law enforcement regards that as a threatening act in and of itself, and a dangerous act, and it can be prosecuted.
Including against the officers, it's dangerous.
It's a danger for the, it's right, so it's a danger for the victim and the residents, and law enforcement regards it as a danger to them because they're going into a situation that doesn't exist with unpredictable potential consequences.
They don't know what happens next, that's right.
Scott McFarland, as always, thank you very much. Coming up, we head back to the Hill. California Democratic Congressman Pete Aguilar joins the Takeout next.
I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason.
You heard it. President Trump saying he does not want Somali immigrants in the United States at all. This comes as a source tells CBS News the Trump administration has ordered ICE to target undocumented Somali immigrants in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. California Congressman and Chair of the House Democratic Caucus, Pete Aguilar, joins me now. Congressman, good to have you. As you know, I know, the nation knows, the president said a lot more than that about Somali immigrants, called them garbage in that White House cabinet meeting yesterday. Your reaction?
The president was clearly unhinged and is not well when it comes to this topic. It's incredibly unfortunate that this is the language that he uses, but this isn't anything that's new to the American people. We know that he is targeting individuals across this country. We know he is weaponizing ICE. We know he is allowing ICE to engage in illegal acts across the country, disrupting family barbecues and church ceremonies, pulling people, gardeners who are working in the communities. That's what Donald Trump's immigration policy looks like, and it's incredibly unfortunate. And if he wanted to work with Democrats in a bipartisan way, we would prioritize deporting violent criminals, but that's not what this president is doing. He is rounding people up. He is allowing them to conduct illegal raids, and he is trying to weaponize this agency to put fear in Americans' minds.
We've also had reporting at CBS, Congressman, that the Trump administration is halting all immigration cases, including citizenship ceremonies for nationals of some 19 different countries. That's not just vetting, that's stopping things that have already been vetted from even occurring.
Yeah, it's again, I mean, it's incredibly unfortunate. These are likely individuals who have been vetted during this Trump administration. And so by using this process and by not allowing folks to take their citizenship final steps, the president is hurting our economy, he's hurting our communities, and it's just wrong.
So, as you know, this week, the phrase war criminal has been thrown around. The Pentagon regards the throwing that around of that as irresponsible in regard to the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. Do you believe, based on what you know, Congressman, that what has happened off the shores of Venezuela, at least on September 2nd, could constitute a war crime?
I look forward to hearing more details and hopefully testimony about what happened. I think it very well could be a war crime. based on the reporting that we have seen. And I don't think that's irresponsible to say. I think it is based on the facts and the merits. But it's pretty clear that within the Trump administration and within the Defense Department and the Pentagon, the buck doesn't stop with our leaders. The buck doesn't stop with Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth. They are throwing admirals under the bus. They will throw anyone under the bus if it diverts the attention on what their potentially illegal actions have meant. And so we need to get to the truth. And so that's why I appreciate that in a bipartisan, bicameral way, House and Senate leaders will ask the tough questions and get to these answers. That's what the American people are due, and that's honestly our job. Pete Hegseth may not like it, but that is exactly what our job is.
Even a novice would know, Congressman, that you do not need an aircraft carrier strike force to stop drug-running boats off the coast of any country, Venezuela or any other. Do you think something else is at stake here? Do you believe, as the president said yesterday, land strikes could begin and those are part of something else regarding Nicolas Maduro and the leadership in Venezuela?
Land strikes would be an illegal act without being authorized by Congress. We need to ensure that the president knows that. It's clear that something else is going on. As you mentioned, the staging of personnel so close to the coast and so much personnel that has been placed over there should raise the alarm for many Americans. And something else is going on here, and I would encourage my Republican colleagues as well to speak up about this issue. Some of them have said it behind closed doors, but they should say it out in public. What this is costing the American people is also very, very relevant to this discussion. And I think that the American people would be shocked at the price tag of what Donald Trump's actions have meant so far.
Speaking of Donald Trump's actions, the president today pardoned one of your colleagues, Henry Cuellar of Texas. Your reaction?
Henry's a valued member of the Democratic caucus. I look forward to working with him in the future. There's no rhyme or reason oftentimes for President Trump's pardons. The president is allowed pretty wide ability to pardon individuals. I and members of the January 6th committee received pardons in the last administration. We didn't ask for, but we received. President Trump retains that ability, and look forward to continuing to work with Henry.
Before I let you go, the president said he was prosecuted by the Biden administration because he disagreed on policy, immigration specifically. Is that how the Democratic caucus regards the bribery charges leveled against Henry Cuellar and his wife?
That's not how we regard it. But look, the president's entitled to his opinion on the subject. Oftentimes, his tweets and his rants don't make a lot of sense. But like I said, we look forward to continuing to work with Henry. I serve on the Appropriations Committee with him. I have for a number of years, and will continue to work. And he's just beloved in South Texas, and he will continue to be beloved in South Texas and likely effective for his constituents.
Chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, Peter Aguilar of California. Congressman, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy Wednesday, everyone. This is The Takeout. You know what we are, but I'll remind you, relentlessly curious, reliably civil, and occasionally clever. The Daily Report coming up next.